So, I assume Mondays are still a good day for me. I don't know. We haven't picked a time to meet with our fellows, have we?
I don't think we have yet.
I do know that I think my seminar conflicts with the time that we were meeting this year, so it can't be the same time for me. I don't know when David's David doesn't have any classes. Never mind. We tend to schedule all of our lit lab track classes on the same day of the week. That's why I was thinking, oh, maybe it would also have affected David, but it doesn't have one, so it doesn't matter. Any other items people wanted to add onto the agenda? I think keeping in mind that we have about a month till we're going to meet again, but it won't be a month where probably lots of coding will happen. Well, I'm around, but
I have a separate question for you maybe after, but I just don't want to forget about one of the students' projects.
Okay. But not part of this recording.
No, I don't think that's necessary.
Okay. All right. Okay, those are good questions. Let's see. Anything else that we should follow up on from other weeks?
I mean, there are these that I think wanted more discussion in the 1128. I don't know if we have time to look over all of them.
Yeah, we can talk about this one. That's something we talked about before, and I think it did. Yeah, that's worth talking about again. See if there's a better way for us to do it that will work for us. Okay, we might have time to do it at least. We'll see. That was a discussion I think I wasn't there for, right? Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I have here a couple of PRs. Sorry, Bryce, to overload you with those. My productivity means you slowing down. Sometimes I realize, so you have to review them all.
That's fine.
So I think this is ready to go unless there's anything outstanding. I know you had an idea about a different way of it working, but
yeah, I will say
real problems with that before. But go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say I wasn't quite sure if I was sold with answer sets have extra information in them is a valid reason to not do that. Because that's just the reason why, right? Is it just answer sets have extra information? I also thought we had.
What do you mean answer sets? It's sessions. I said answer set, but I really mean session. Should have.
Oh, okay. Maybe you had said answer set. Okay, so you did session specifically.
Yeah, that's the main reason. It's so there are a few reasons why. That's not worth changing the design of the MA courts, I think. But the other reason is you can kind of get stuck with stale data in a different way. We don't really resolve that with our approach anyway, because it's an index that's not looked up dynamically. It turns into an object where we load the specific data. So it doesn't really change that part.
Well, if the data is changing, the index is going to change anyway. And that's the thing I feel is the weirdness of the index is you have to people have to start putting the index as an entry in their field, an entry in their spreadsheet that needs to be updated when they add rows in certain positions. Because just adding the index, I feel just complicates things. And
it's just a lookup though, right? So it's not like it gets stored, but we're not using it in a way that it's relevant for anything other than loading the data from the court one time.
Is it just a lookup? Yeah. I know Matt ends up using it it's in the spreadsheet for Illinois. And I think it was, and there was some of the things that I think Matt commented, on one of the grant partner issues.
Have a static key to use there, which is So that kind of
Yeah.
means like a database.
Yeah, it kind of just ends up working like a database, which is
Then we should probably just have
fine,
a
but
database.
most people are
I
not
guess.
like used to making it work like a database. I'm not super sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, so it was specifically, so Matt said the idea of having some of these functions point to / use a unique index on the court spreadsheet is the way to go. Then the program can just access whatever columns of data it needs in using that index. We'll need to standardize the name of the index column, maybe call it index, and require that it is unique. Like, I think that is how his conception of how it ends up working when you are forced to sort of use an index like that. And also to bring up the fact is the index will get stale if you add a court to a thing, like that. If just a raw index will get stale too.
Right. If we only store the index and did a lookup for every screen, but we don't. Yeah. I don't think we do that anywhere. It's just, like I said, we could use validation code so the lookup happens on the same screen. But essentially, we're doing a database lookup, like which row do you want to retrieve? Oh, it's this row. Here's all the information from that row that then is stored in the session. That's what we're doing right now. People could, I guess, use that index later, but essentially it becomes irrelevant once they've used it with our examples, at least. I don't know. I guess I don't know how everybody's using it.
It ends up hanging around a lot. I know Matt uses it throughout the whole interview of trial court index and uses that to index into the courts, the list of courts every time he wants to use that particular court.
But why? Because he has a trial court object. Why is he doing that? Can I see which interview do you think that is?
Let me see if I can pull it up.
I do think that putting that unique ID in the spreadsheet specifically would lend it to more naive users making use of that in ways that are inappropriate.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm thinking too, because it's not really a spreadsheet where we can maintain constraints. It's a spreadsheet. It's not a database where we can have real constraints. I would probably not want to. Is the fee waiver the one that's been working the most? Is that the one you're thinking
of? It's in the appearance, but I'm realizing I don't have the appearance downloaded on mine, and I've refactored out a bit from that.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can't have a unique ID that's tied to any outside data. It needs to be a synthetic ID because we don't want to limit how people use the court spreadsheet. Some people might want to do it in a way that does not, like we found at Massachusetts, we have more than one entry for a lot of courts that have the same filing code, for example, in Tyler, and the same court code for the docket number. We still might have multiple logical entities we want to put in our JSON file for us, not spreadsheet, to represent that court.
And I think Bryce just put a link in the chat to be.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
It's less. Yeah, finding it just search trial court index. I was going to say searching through it. It's less than I remember, but it's still sort of around. Maybe he probably ended up refactoring to a bit.
Right. Okay. There was this special lookup to handle Cook County being weird.
Yeah.
Although I think we could probably refactor it to use Amanda, the one we built for Amanda, right? It's the same situation essentially.
It probably could. Yeah. So I guess it gets used less than I thought. It does get specifically recomputed several times in the review block, which is a thing. But I guess that's not super strange.
I mean,
I guess I'm probably remembering some of the more intermediate versions that Matt went through where he was hanging onto it for a lot longer. So maybe it's not as big of an issue as I remember it being. But
I mean, I guess I can see a reason to pause and work on a best way now, since we're telling people, hey, here's the new model to use. It's a chance to change people's approaches. I was thinking the current PR is just the most small refactor without making anyone change anything, just letting them do their approach.
yeah, and that's
Better,
fine.
but the validation code would work. Then it would be like you never store the index, but you would still have to keep it in your interview, because I'm not sure how other, well, no, we wouldn't have to. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's worth trying to redo that now or not. What I could imagine is we wrote out the validation code so that you have a screen that says sets trial court, and on that screen it loads an index, and then you use the index, or even if we kept it at the name trial court, but on that screen the trial court was replaced with the actual data, which is basically the pattern that's used for DA catch-all. I'll show you what that looks like if anybody wants to see it. So it starts out as an object, and then you replace it with the native data type. So that's the pattern Jonathan does for catch-all, which we've copied. So we could easily do the same thing where it starts as fields x dot, or just call the field trial court, and then underneath the validation code, if trial court is instance of integer, load the trial court with that index.
That's fair.
Then you never store it anywhere.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. I must have more of that, and it's more of the issue, like how. So, like my like way of thinking of it was like, how would someone do a similar screen to what we currently have for like our map select for courts, even if it's not like the same logic behind the scenes. Just assuming that they had some level of map select that, like, oh, there are 5 courts in this county. Here's where they all are. You're like, which one would you like to go to? To do that, they would have to individually like filter out, or like they'd have to get like call some of the methods that you did add to like get all of the courts in a particular county, and then they would have to use. I forget. Were you returning indices? I don't remember what it looked like, but they'd have to use each individual index of each of those to then get like, this is the full object, which you could then show like, oh, this court at this address, this court is at this address, etc. To get like the full information of each one. And that was I think that's the biggest thing. It's less of like having a single court when you get out. Like an index isn't too bad for that, but when you start trying to balance multiple of those, trying to do it by hand would, I don't think it would work super well for a lot of the authors.
And it's fair to see that pattern because it came from this AL court, which was based on the Massachusetts Court 1, which that was like a couple megabytes of data, right? You had to remove from the JSON for e-filing, right? That was some of the data you had to end up having to remove.
Yes.
But we could build it into here. It feels like it's an easy new method to say get map list or something like that. Get location list for all the courts that are visible. We might have that in the MA courts library already. I feel like that's where it would go. It would go on the AL court loader class as a new method. It would be 2 calls to the spreadsheet. So far, the performance seems perfectly fine. I mean, there's a lot of changes we could make here. My concern was about doing it in a way that would be too sticky, since there's no performance issues. Like, I don't think it matters if we do a couple of disk hits per interview.
Mhm.
That would be a performance thing. But I guess if we start adding more and more calls, maybe we're like, okay, we need to store the data frame in memory rather than having it be stored on the disk for each lookup. But basically, we have the filter quartz method, whatever one we were looking at here. We could have a similar one that's like, show me the locations. And then I forget how that works for the Massachusetts core repo. I think it's a method similarly of list. I could be wrong. Maybe it's not how it works. I don't remember.
It's all from the document number stuff.
Make this place object. There are a lot of weird things about like what it expected the object to look like that we weren't doing.
Mhm.
Combined location, so it's a function that's showing the location for each place.
I see. Okay.
That's what we're doing now. So we just haven't.
So we had to specialize it a lot more than I realized, I guess, anyway.
Yeah.
I was assuming it would be something that if you just had a block of, or like a list of objects that each had an address block, it would be fairly straightforward to get to something like that, which is why I was trying to lean towards like just get the court and all of its information, because I feel like authors would be a lot more used to like essentially just trying to get people as much information out of the data frame as possible, because I'm not sure we can like anticipate every single need that people are going to have, and and so if people can, but like most of the authors seem to be like get pretty good at like, this is a list, I know how to do things in a list, but like data frames just don't make any sense, and so that's like fair. And so like if we just get it, unless like the data frames don't make any sense, and it's more of like making our API make people not realize that there's a data frame there. Like, and I'm not sure if we're flexible enough to that yet. Maybe we are. I'm not sure.
No, I think that's fair. I don't think we're really going that far into what like all the things someone would do with it are easy yet. We just was like solving one more problem.
I see. Okay. I guess we were taking different views,
but maybe we are at the point where we should generalize it to try to solve all the needs people have. I don't know. It's like that's always the branching point, right? Like you start out by building just the thing in front of you. You try to learn from it, and then you try to build the general purpose thing. I just don't know yet where we are on that maturity level for this library. To me, it still seems pretty early in, but
I guess that's wrong. I guess my view is you build the simplest thing can be the most general, and so it's just a matter of like making, I don't know, like yeah, like I agree, but like maybe we don't necessarily need to have an extra get specifically just this address function. We just have a get, I don't know. Like look at there's filters, quartz, get matching.
One of the things
we
talked about adding, which I decided, that's really not the right time to add that feature, is the similarity or distance search. So I was thinking, well, I don't know. Obviously we could have done it, but what you could do is if you take that list of quartz that we get back, which is a list of indices, and then you just did a list comprehension, as court for court in filter quartz, whatever, right? You'd have all of those objects, and it wouldn't be that slow.
Yeah, but it's mostly the thing that like they could do that before. Like there was nothing stopping someone like doing a load quartz list comprehension as quartz and then do everything they want with that. And I thought the main purpose of this PR was to like get rid of all of those like weird list comprehension-y, pandas-y things. And we've gotten rid of some of the pandas-y things by having a better filter function. But I guess you still end up needing those comprehensions for most of it, so you can't really get away from that if people want to be more powerful.
If we know the things people need to do 80% of the time and we build just those methods, it feels pretty reasonable. But
until people do the thing they need to do 20% of the time, and then we have to go back and do it again. Like,
yeah, but if we can't predict what those things are going to be, then well, I think where I am is maybe like we could in the future envision adding a parameter that lets you get a list of objects to each of these methods that return a list of IDs.
Okay.
That seems like the way to handle it to me. Right now, we just know one state that wants to use this. I don't know that we'll get Matt to move his code over anytime soon. I bet any new person who's doing court stuff will use it though. So
yeah,
but we might still learn something from Amanda trying to use it that we don't know yet.
Okay.
I think what most people want is just like code they can copy and place.
Yeah.
To get the specific thing they're trying to do. At least this is something we don't have to spend an hour trying to debug live on a stream.
Yes, yeah.
To explain how to do it. That's the main.
Yeah, that's the thing I agree is the good thing to avoid.
Okay.
But I guess.
All right. So I'm going to merge this one from that discussion. And
Michelle, I don't know if you had any other thoughts on it. I don't know if you had gotten a chance to review it at all yet.
I'm missing a lot of context, so I'm gonna sit this one out. I think I said the amount that I could say.
That's fair.
Is it worth adding context in here about that discussion or in the issue?
I think we might want to open a new issue.
I mean, the context I think is in the. I don't know. I think the context is in the comments, and I think a lot of what we were just talking about was just hashing out in more detail what we mean in the comments, or like what we already made comments about. And I feel we landed at the same spot that like it's like we could be doing more, but maybe we just don't do that right now. Like,
okay, I was just thinking maybe capturing that conversation would be useful so people don't have to rehash that conversation in the future.
It's hard to track stuff from the PR though, but I think if we open an issue, it's easy. So yeah, I'll try to capture the gist here, but feel free to add more thoughts. The biggest thing is like we had a lot of things that we built for Massachusetts which really have to do with the very complicated hierarchy of courts we have in Massachusetts. In most states, turns out you just file in your county court, which I didn't know when I built that, or which means you don't want to do a lot of fancy things usually, or like maybe the map would only make sense in Minnesota and 2 of their jurisdictions.
But again, it's something that you need. Like that's the thing is I don't feel like even though it's a few just like a small number of jurisdictions, it's larger jurisdictions, and so even though it's like it is the 80-20% rule that like the last 20% will take a lot more time and like engineering to do it, but you have to do it. It's not a thing that I like think most people will want to like skip. Like I mean we had to make the choice to not do Cook for the e-filing stuff, but like we need to be in Cook eventually because that's so much of the population of Illinois. Like, and so I don't think that for us for the API design, I don't think that trying to push off 80 you can do 80% of it with it, it's good enough. I'm not quite sure that's the right choice to be made because for this particular case you'll want to have that other 20% there too.
Well, That's right. I think, but in Massachusetts, like we knew, like doing jurisdiction-based search by distance from your location or your presence or absence in a certain bounding area made sense. Doesn't really make sense in most states. And even for like the biggest county, they don't have location-based courts in Minnesota, right? They have specialty courts that are by topic rather than by area. The other ones, there's 2 courts to choose from. So we could ask Amanda, like, would you want a map to show people the courts?
Mhm.
But it would be anti-pattern for like, well, it would be unhelpful for people in St. Paul and Minneapolis because they shouldn't choose the criminal court because it's the closest court to them if their case is a family law case.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't mean to say that we should be using the Massachusetts solution, but just that, like, I don't think we should call it done if we know we're hitting like the easy cases where there's just one county. Like, I don't think it's considered done. Is all I was trying to say for that.
No, that's fair. I think it's what I was trying to suggest is that there's probably solutions that I was thinking about specific solutions, I guess. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
I think that's really what it was. That we shouldn't implement some of the same things because they just wouldn't be good. Like, I don't think the map pattern is a good one for many states that we've seen so far.
That's
and
right.
I think we've been working mostly with Midwest states. They had like a very different relationship to the county because of the way those were laid out in the West compared to the East Coast, where those boundaries were set 100 or 50 years earlier, versus people just drawing big grids on maps. So
yeah,
that might be a big difference. Maybe if we were working with more East Coast states, we would see more of the same kind of things that Massachusetts has.
That's right.
All right. Okay, well, anyway, that's that one's done for now, but it's not done forever. There's still more room for us to try to fix it and add more features that it needs. Catch-all. So I tried to ask Jonathan, like, I had an idea. I was like, oh, wait a second. We're talking about the first time a variable is mentioned. People use catch-alls in different ways. So like I built this thing for GBLS, which they're still using today, where the whole point of it is you can put in a variable in the interview. In your template file, you upload your template, it triggers an exception. You answer the question for that missing variable in the template. And then there's a way that we're using it where it's probably going to either be an if statement or a string, right? And there might be some other more complicated context, but the first time you mention it in the interview order block, it's probably okay to just let people answer it then, because it's a new variable that they haven't defined or properly. If they use the Weaver to build the interview, they probably don't have that variable there undefined. And there's no question for it unless they wrote it themselves or accidentally changed it. So I was thinking, well, maybe that's enough context so we can just always require the value from the context that's the first time it's mentioned. It doesn't really matter whether it's a code block or in the template. Whatever the first mention is, we're going to say that's enough context. But according to Jonathan, that is not possible. The first exception where the DA catch-all gets initialized, you do not know the context. There is a second exception that happens, and only some of the time, because mentioning the code block's not enough to trigger that exception. So unfortunately, I have my brilliant idea for like, hey, we would actually be okay with this. Always assuming the first place that's mentioned is all of the context working was wrong. So does that make sense?
Well, I'm not sure why it needs the second one. I'm not sure why that adds context, but I understand that there need to be 2 exceptions.
Yeah, Jonathan's example was if you have string, I'm reading this from the Slack because I was trying to find it to refresh. If you have like string parentheses foo, the first exception that shows up is name air foo, and you don't get any information that it was outside of a string. And then the second, I had to get a little lost for the second exception, but the second exception is then it is, I'm not sure which one it is, but it gives the information that it's like the context is it's looking for a string. But the first exception is always name air, and there's no additional programmatic information that you get from Python that like I was looking for a name error, or I was looking for a string, and then this happened, which I guess is just sort of.
So you need a spot where an error is caused where it's looking for a specific type, not just looking for a name.
You need it to, and usually it turns out it's just printing it on screen as a string, but obviously it's not always that. So, let's go back to like that. Let's see if I can find it. Well, no.
And to clarify, this is all trying to fix or seeing if there is an upstream fix for the issue of just defining a variable never actually asks for it.
Yeah, I was trying to think if there's an easy upstream fix. And like, to be honest, like all of our interviews probably only use one catch-all, which is the string one, because there's, well, maybe they do more than that. I guess we don't really know, but it depends if we're using the time that they're triggered in the code block. There's no reason for us to assume it's anything other than a string, really. But we have all of these other things that we can catch. Sometimes people use parentheses, which is interesting. I don't know why they do that. We can catch those. We're not doing those yet, thanks to now that we're on the newest version of DocAssemble. There's a handle for callable. But yeah, honestly, like we'd probably be okay with just this first one. It just turns it into assumes it's a string. For most templates, right? Like mostly you're putting information on the screen. You're not doing something else with it. You're putting it on the screen or in the template.
It might be conditions too, but I don't know how often. But yeah, conditions and string, I think, would be the only things that would be like in documents.
But a condition will trigger a question still. So with our current catch-all logic.
I mean, even in a skip undefined template.
Yeah,
that's what this is trying to. Oh, I see.
Yeah, it would still trigger it there because there's context for it then. So that's what makes it trigger the catch-all question. It's only when you just mention the object that doesn't do anything. It doesn't need to know what kind of object it is.
But I thought skip undefined stopped that from happening.
No.
So skip undefined because skip undefined won't affect anything that's like in the interview, and we're skipping questions that are in the interview. Like skip undefined is only affecting things when you're trying to assemble the template.
That's what I mean. If it's an if statement in the template.
Oh yeah, an if statement in the template would still not do anything.
Okay.
Sorry, good clarification. I was thinking of if statements in the interview order, which are pretty common, but you're right.
Sure.
But you're right. There's still another case where it wouldn't do anything. Anything in the template, it won't trigger. Doesn't matter.
Oh, sorry. Okay, that's good to clarify. I was confused.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing we could think is, well, okay, if we have catch-alls turned on, do we still want skip undefined in the template? Is it a better experience to show someone a question with no context than to allow it to be just left blank in the template? We could turn off skip undefined as a default because we have the catch-all now. But that might break some people's existing interviews. I mean,
I was gonna say, Quinn, I feel like you've observed more users like actually going through interviews than I have, but at least from like what I've see with students who run into errors or like unexpected screens, they're more likely to stop just completely on like something like a screen that doesn't make sense or doesn't have enough context on it, as opposed to keep going. If that matches what you're thinking, like what you've seen, then it feels like the safer thing is to have something that's blank in the than like have a catch-all in there and asks them a question that has no context and they don't really understand, and then just stop filling the interview.
I guess actually another thing that I hadn't been thinking about, which is the error action requires us to have skip undefined to really work. So I think to let people download their interview at any point in the interview, we need to have skip undefined turned on.
Yeah, that's fair.
So that's not really a relevant road. I wasn't thinking of that beforehand. I just came up with it on the fly, and I guess there's a reason I didn't think of it before. I guess the best we can do is
That may
logging.
be good to capture somewhere.
Yeah.
Sorry, like maybe at least in these notes.
I mean, we've said it a couple times, but say it again. I guess we could. So there's two things. I actually tried another variable to override the custom error action screen. You set with a metadata option as well. And when I tried to turn that off for a particular interview, it did not respect my changing my answer. So having it enabled once anywhere in any file you include means you can't turn it off later. And we found the same thing with catch-alls, right? The feature for catch-alls, if you turn it off, it just ignores it silently. For the custom error action, you can put a different custom error action in there, but you can't turn off the custom error action.
I see.
So those are two bugs that would help a little bit, letting developers turn those features on and off when they're running on their own, trying to track down a problem.
I was going to clarify, was that saying that's not for skip undefined, that was just for the catch-all and the error action? You can't turn that off? Okay.
Yep. We should be able to fix those, I think. So it's just changing the parsing logic a little bit.
Can you override other things in feature block or metadata blocks? Okay. So it's not a general features issue. It's just something with catch-all, probably.
I think those features are just something that people don't use that often. So.
Thumbs up for that. I agree. It probably should be fixed upstream, and so we can let people turn it off before unilaterally turn it on for them.
I couldn't really tell if Jonathan was open to an idea of logging information. Optionally, I guess. That's like a different kind of feature than I've normally added as a PR to DocAssemble, one that has a configuration option. But letting people log on the screen that the variable is not defined. That seemed like the only thing we could still do from our list of ideas from last week.
Yeah.
I think it's worth a shot.
Does that seem like the right feature to build a configuration option that lets you choose to log on the screen anytime someone has an undefined variable?
Would we want it to? Yeah.
Anytime someone has an undefined variable?
Yeah.
with
I
a catch.
mean,
with a catch-all block.
I.
It wouldn't be
So
necessary
if-
to log it if they didn't have a catch-all block.
Yeah,
I
so if
see.
they have catch all turned on, the interview comes across something that wasn't there, pop a
Okay. That
and
makes sense.
and if this config is option. Do we want to try and tie it to the bug, or would we want to try and tie it to a different a new config for the server, or a new config variable to the server?
Separate PR. You mean like it would be a PR dependent on the first one, or wouldn't have to be necessarily?
No, just like which config variable would you be turning on to show these logs? Because I think
I
we've
mean,
mentioned,
showing more log statements doesn't seem like it would need. I mean, can't you just do it?
I think
Can't you just
clarify
make
by
it automatic?
log. It was like to clarify by log, we're using the log feature to like flash a message on the screen. So it is a
Oh.
user looking thing. It's not just a back
Oh,
log.
I thought we meant in the logs. Okay.
I should just say flash instead for stuff like that, even though it's
Okay.
Docker simple calls it the log function. It doesn't make a ton of sense.
Okay.
I'm used to calling him a toast, but yeah,
Toast works.
they're
Yeah.
called a Flash and Flask.
I think having it log in the logs is also a useful option as far as development goes.
Yeah, I think that would be an easy addition. There are many things in the logs that are not useful.
Yes.
So I'm all for adding more useful things there. And this isn't going to be a thing that will like overload the logs or make it difficult to read other things. But that's an easy fix, and I think but it doesn't really, it helps, but it doesn't really address like most authors going through finding unexpected screens won't go to the logs if something seems wrong. So I think we still do need the toast.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about it too. I mean, that's like if we could turn it off at 100% of the time, and we're like, hey, you're not seeing a variable in your output that you think you should, try turning this off. If that's like a error chasing thing we always tell people to do, would we still need the logging?
I mean, we tell people how they can replace questions that they don't want there or that they want to change, and everybody's always asking that. It's not like they remember.
Yeah.
And I was going to say,
That's
the real thing about this is that it's completely silent, and so it's completely silent, and I think it has the potential to affect like interview logic as well. Like if you had some extra block variable that you're setting at the end of something that you expected this other thing to like completely go through and change interview logic somehow, but you misspelled it, it's completely silent and it won't go through. So it could change things about the interview as well, and not just, is this a missing object in your tuple?
That's a good point. Although it does not stop in the interview playground. Let me go to my playground here. You'll still see the red variables, right? So if there's something.
Yeah, that's fair.
So that's another thing we can tell people to do.
Yeah, we should be. A better way to address variables would be a good idea too. But yeah,
I'm not sure if that's a different thread to pull on, like using that pre-interview parsing asked to figure out, to warn people before they run it, like, hey, these are issues in your interview, or make people do a linting step, like, hey, run the debugger on your interview. We add a button to the playground that makes that more visible and says, hey, these are the issues that we think your interview might have. Would that be a better fix? Like, you've misspelled these 3 things.
that's a good fix. I don't quite know if it's better.
Okay. It feels like a
It's
little
definitely-
gimmicky,
feels-
that's all.
It feels a little gimmicky. It's also a bit heavier in terms of what we actually add to that. Like, it could be. It has the. I've thought about similar things, and it's like it has the potential to not be like really gimmicky and like actually do a lot of things that DocAssemble does not do when it comes to filtering and looking for questions, because like things that are like attribute errors won't show up as red in that little
Interesting.
thing. So if you have an object, but like you have an attribute that you haven't defined on there and you misspelled that, it just doesn't show up there at all. But like we could essentially we could make that more powerful and or do it better ourselves in like a debug interview process, but I don't know if it's a replacement for like the much simpler show the toast on screen fix, because it serves a different purpose, because it's like something's going wrong here. Do you like here's some extra like tools to help you with things, whereas this is pointing out, hey, something's going wrong to you. And I think a lot of new authors will be very confused by some of this behavior. Although I guess it has the chance to just confuse more too. Like some of the toasts that DocAssemble shows you, like we can't control and don't make any sense. Like sometimes I get like, oh, the like remainder of the block. It's just, like I don't remember what the exact text is in the toast, but it's like if you have if you're executing a code block and you were trying to get to like you set the variable that triggered that code block earlier, and then it jumps out and jumps back. It will never jump back in, and DocAssemble will let you know that, but it's in a confusing way, such that most people end up ignoring that error message. This might be a similar thing if it's not explained well enough in a toast. People will just be like, "Oh, DocAssemble showed me another little flash," like, and they won't think of it until we point it out and like come to us, and we're like, "Oh, no, notice this little thing," and maybe it'll help, but.
That's basically what I'm thinking of, is like this is going to be for people to help explain it to us when they run into the problem.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
What can we do to help? Like, and things that are easier to see when they're running it interactively are always good. It's like, even if they have no chance of seeing it on their own, but that may not be good enough. Okay, so we're thinking, I don't think there's a better way for us to do it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So basically what we've landed on is this thing will stop users from seeing as many errors, so they'll be able to get to the end of the interview more often. It will help solve, I don't know, maybe a third for our common assembly line interviews of the problems that people might run into, letting them still provide an answer to that question. Maybe not even a third. For some kinds of interviews, it's like the one where I was saying you upload a template, has no questions yet. That's a little bit more useful, I guess, in more circumstances. But do we? All right, and then the mitigation we have is this logging. Obviously, you never, as a developer, want your users to run into these problems. So this is mostly about. Guess I don't really know where I was going with that thread there. I guess we have clear to-dos, and this seems like the generally right direction, I guess, for us to go in, fixing those 2 bugs so people can turn it off if they don't want it, and the logging to the screen.
Yeah, I think that's the right track.
Oh, and the DocAssemble log too. Good call. I won't talk about text reminders because that's still a feature that's a little further away. Should we talk about any of these other ones? We've talked about auto installing packages before, and we decided against it. I was still kind of in favor of doing it, so I'm willing to revisit it.
Where had we? So I think the last time had we decided against it. I think the last time we had talked about it, I think I made this issue, which I'm pull it up and send it in the chat.
Okay.
That was roughly like, it's a thing that we could consider doing. I didn't write anything else down, so I don't know if I don't know. Maybe I don't know if I recorded it wrong in that issue. But I didn't think that we did. I think we decided not to do it right then, but I didn't know if it was a thing we had decided against doing in general.
I think we decided against doing it in general because we were like, well, sometimes we want to test a different version of the package or have a different version installed.
Okay.
I guess this is an example right now where we have a new feature which was disruptive, where we didn't want it to be automatically installed. But there are other ways we could manage around that, right? We could turn off the action temporarily.
Yeah.
If we're okay with like our default being we always have the latest packages installed on dev, then having the custom action seems like a good way to do it to me. We would just need an API key. And then I guess we have to write a new action to do this, right?
That's why I was adding it. That's why I have it on here, because I'm in action thinking mode of just like, oh, what are all these small things that like we've talked about doing but haven't really done that we could do with GitHub Actions. So.
Okay. And then the question is, when should it go to test? Should it go to test?
Yeah.
I think we're probably talking about tagged releases, right?
I think tagged releases on
decide.
test would be good.
And every release on dev, as soon as we have a new commit to main.
That also feels like the right way of doing it. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that feels like it would help a lot, actually, for us to always have the latest thing on there. It's a big thing to remember what to install.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we just forget to do anyway. It's not big, but it's something easy to forget.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, Michelle?
My only thought is then like triggering tests so that we know if it works, as opposed to just installing those packages to see if those packages break anything.
If they break other packages, you mean?
Yep. Because otherwise, what's the point, right? That's what we're doing by auto installing them, is we're hoping that we'll catch anything breaking, right? Or maybe there's another point now. Anyway, that's my one thought.
That's part of the point. I think part of the point is to catch breaking, but also just to catch like, oh, we haven't thought about doing this. It like dog food is a combination of this breaks something and also this isn't as good as we thought it is now that we're actually using it we've been using it for a few days.
Sure. Okay.
And so
well, we'll have this automated test to make sure the front page of the interviews work at least, which is something.
Sure.
Yeah, not on dev though, but
not on dev.
I hadn't been planning. Like we could do it on dev, but I just hadn't been planning on it. We don't use the dispatch much.
I guess we could install a list of like Sentinel packages on the dev server.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
To say these are ones we want to make sure the
We'll
front page still works.
We'll have to keep it up to date with production and test, but yeah.
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to install every package that's on the test server on the dev server.
Oh, okay. I see. Sentinel. Got it. I understand the context now. Thanks.
I think we could decide we need it to be a long list, but I think it's okay if we didn't do that. All right. Okay. Well, this is good. I think that's good. The right choice, and we'll just be ready to turn it off when we specifically don't want it. I know it came up in like one of our meetings before. It was a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't as recent as September.
I see.
But I feel good about us making that change.
Okay.
Auto building docs from API. So the basic thing is trying to make these API reference things work, right?
Yes. I think the issue was the context was we tried finding out what a particular parameter did, because I think there was a question on it somewhere, maybe in the grant partners chat. And then we went to the documentation and we're like, oh, that parameter is not even there. it's because we last generated this documentation or the API documentation like months ago, and we added the new parameter like a month ago. And so it's another actiony thing that I would be happy to take on. That like anytime the documentation gets built, it would still have to be triggered on like someone doing something new to the documentation, but we could, anytime the documentation gets built, just also check out the most recent version of assembly line and build this API reference. And so it wouldn't be stored in the repo anymore. It would just be getting directly generated on each action.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. That makes sense. I think I never found these actually worked very well, but I guess it's still better to have it than to have to make people go to the Python module.
Yeah.
I kind of gave up on it.
I was looking
10,
for
15
it.
hours on this, and I was like, this is terrible. So I'm not going to keep maintaining it. But if we are like, it has some value, and we can automate the production of it, then that's good enough for me. Sorry, what were you saying, Michelle?
I was looking for it because of a question of Caroline's. Like, this was the first place I went because I went, hey, Caroline, you might be able to look it up in the documentation. And then it was like, no, never mind. Just look it up in the repository. That was all.
I have been trying to keep this up to date. So
Yeah.
most things should be documented here.
Yeah.
But we're maybe not as detailed.
It might be a good idea, if anything. Yeah, I agree that it's subpar and that it's not super readable. And I'm not super confident if we were just to reference just that particular page to any of like the grant partners or authors, that they would be able to navigate it themselves. The only benefit that I see would be really useful is potentially if they like just the fact it's all on the same search. And so if they like, oh, I've heard about this parameter, I don't remember where it's used or anything, they can go to, there's one place to search for all of our documentation. And whether or not we have more detailed docs on it, or it's just, it exists and it's on this function, it helps that it's there. But I don't know if it's like, I agree we would need a lot more work to make it really usable. And I don't know what the extent would be to just, we need more standalone guides on how to use some of these objects, or if we just need like, here's a quick example of how you would use this in an interview or something like that in each of these doc strings.
Well, having good doc strings is a good idea. It was really hard to figure out the right way to format them so that it looked nice here.
Yes.
But if we were just like, at least you can pull the doc string into this file, that's still something. I don't remember. Yeah. So anyway, and then I was like, so if we're not going to change, I think it's fine for us to auto-generate it anyway. I guess that's where I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand if it's a problem that we don't know that we haven't written the doc strings well, or that we don't want to use the doc strings.
I think it's both. So like this format, I don't find super easy to read the way that these are formatted. Like there's not like a really helpful index that tells you methods. I've seen some really usable documentation where there's a detailed API reference, and this is not that. The other thing is, as soon as you tried to use this, it's like, okay, you actually really need to write a lot more than fits in the doc string. And so we started doing that here with these. So these are more, I would try to be like more comprehensive than Jonathan's documentation page, where like listing all of the methods, for example, in one place instead of it jumping around. I don't know if I was that much better, but at least it's shorter. So there's less to read through. And then to have examples and a little bit more explanation. So I was like, okay, we really just have to handwrite the documentation for people to be able to use it. So, but this is still something I end up having to do sometimes because I didn't have time to handwrite the documentation for something.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a lot of the same thoughts that like this is we could like even if we added as much information as possible to this, like all these doc strings, it would be enough for like people with programming backgrounds, but I don't think it would be enough for like people who are really familiar with like this is like, okay, the class is going to have all these methods on it and stuff like that. Like even authors who know what they are, there's just the difference between like them like being familiar with reading stuff like this and not. And I don't think I don't think our target audience for these docs would be familiar enough with a lot of it. So
Okay.
But if we could link them to something, that's still something. I mean, yeah. So, okay. So if we think we can automate it, and if we have like things where like, okay, now we're actually going to use these more, we have to come up with the right way to do the doc strings so they actually look like the way we want. I'm fine with learning that. It's just, it ended up being a big time sink. And I felt discouraged about the quality of the results. But I'm happy to try again. I know it can work.
Do we want to, if you have specific ones you preferred, do we want to try and mess around with integrating those instead?
That was the first way we got here. Like we tried like 2 or 3 different libraries to get here. So I don't necessarily know we have to switch our library. I think there might be configuration choices we can make. But
Okay.
for example, I think Microsoft has probably some of the best API documentation. I remember when I was trying to implement a graph API, I really quite liked their documentation. I feel like in general, it's pretty good. There's other ones that I've seen. I'm trying to think of Python ones that I can think of. Don't know what they are though. The fact that you can browse through on the left is something. Let's see. Sometimes these are different pages. Well, anyway, honestly, like this isn't really a big thing, but it's by topic, right? Instead of by the module file. And there's the ability to browse and go deeper to navigate through it a little bit better. I don't know if that's enough to go on. But like, keep in mind that these projects have dedicated technical writers. So
That's true.
we're trying to do like a lot of big software engineering things with a very small team. And I want to be careful about getting distracted from things that are adding value to developer experience, but because we don't have as much developers, like they are too marginal in terms of to justify us spending time on them. Yeah, this looks like
I was gonna say, I'm sorry, I just posted.
Read the docs. Yeah,
I was
that's
gonna
a
say,
popular one. But
yeah, read the docs. And mostly just like the amount of information that ends up in like the doc string sort of like API reference, at least for PyPDF for me, is good enough because probably because they have a decent amount of also just independent topics that if you need something a bit closer, they have all those independent topics and they'll sometimes link to them from each of these specific things. But if you need more information or like every single parameter that you can pass, you can always go there.
Here, I'll share it on the screen just so it's in the recording too. Yeah, this I like the way this looks a lot better too, right? It's a lot cleaner. This is just really,
I think it comes down to the code block. The default code block for this is not what we really want here.
Exactly. So I think those probably are overridable. Docusaurus is out of beta now too. Like I actually don't know which version we're running on. We might need to update. That might make some difference. We might need to regenerate these to see the change.
Yeah.
But it's still a much clearer on-page hierarchy, class, then property, and then it's like kind of all mixed in together.
That's fair.
It's very minor, but like I don't know why you would ever need to copy the function signature into your screen. Maybe you would. Doesn't seem that helpful.
No, I
It'd
don't
be
think it-
nicer if it gave you those for examples as opposed to
Exactly. Yeah. So like I'm probably it does work for examples. There probably is a syntax to do that. But it's very distracting. It's like this is the first thing your eye goes to, but it's not the most helpful information.
That's true.
Like I would want to see a list of the methods. I guess that's the right level of hierarchy, maybe. Property. Yeah, but we don't want to switch to read the docs because we already are using Docusaurus. And, that's like another thing.
Yeah.
Like we could invest in changing our whole platform, but
No, I agree. That's not the right way to go about it.
we might have made the wrong choice if our goal was to focus on really good API documentation with our platform. But
But that's not really how we're doing it anyway.
it's not how we're doing it anyway. Yeah, because we're just handwriting and stuff.
Puppeteer doesn't do it too bad, and I'm pretty sure Puppeteer is using Docusaurus because it looks exactly the same as ours. Which is an example really quick. Mostly those to show that it's possible to do something nice.
Mhm.
Like but it ends up being like a few different pages for like per class, but it sort of is probably what it ends up needing to look like.
Sure, I'll just share that. Let's see. Yeah, that looks pretty good.
They have
It's
like
lot
a split.
cleaner formatting.
Yeah, they have like split for docs and API. API ends up getting a bit more heavier, like since it's on the top bar like that. But once
Oh,
you're
I
on the API bar, or once you're on the API like side tab, it's each class and you can go to each method and it shows just that stuff for the method with the parameters and everything else like that. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So there's no, and there's an overview page too, I guess. Okay. Yeah, so you can click on the top node if you want. And then you can go in.
Yeah. Mostly I don't think Docusaurus is the issue. I think it's maybe the specific like Python HTML generator that we're using that we could tweak. But I agree. I don't really want to mess around with it too much. But at the very least, I don't want to have outdated information.
Yeah. If you think it's an easy action to add,
Mhm.
then let's add the action. And if it turns out to take more than like a couple hours, then let's just delete those pages because you're right. They shouldn't have the out-of-date stuff too.
Yeah. We can. I'd say just point people directly to the Python packages specifically. Maybe if leave the API page there, but just say if you want to see our API, go to like deep link to the docassemble/assembly line folder in GitHub and just say browse these modules. That's probably our best bet.
Okay.
Just because it might still be useful for some people who are very self-startery, but yeah.
I
Okay.
always like to be able to have that option anyway to see how the code works sometimes.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that like sometimes I try to write better doc strings, but it's like personally I end up going to the code every time. And it's probably a me thing because that's just how I read the code, but I don't know enough of how to like say this is what we're doing in the code well enough that I wouldn't want to then go back and look at the code later anyway. So
Okay. Oh, let me just see. What do I have?
sorry.
Okay. No, I'm good. Oh no, we're doing our queue check-in at 1. So give myself 20 minutes to eat lunch and stuff. All right. And we don't really, oh shoot. Well, we figured out the timeline stuff last week. All right. So the only other thing I was going to ask you about, Bryce, is I was thinking of trying to build out that first draft of the thing that takes the fields and lets you add annotations interactively.
Yes.
Is there a particular, it's in the form fixer library I should be looking for some samples of doing screenshots like stuff with PDFs?
Yeah, yeah, it should be. It should be there. I think I can I'll
If
find
that's the
like
right
some
place to look,
example.
that's where I'll start looking. It's okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I
that's
don't
the right
want to
place
get
to
really
look. I
past
don't
it.
remember if there was. I definitely have like some iterations. I don't know if I committed any of it though. That were like, here's a debug that just shows this field, and I had like a very clean way of just screenshotting the field that I want. But I think it was honestly just you screenshot the page and then crop the image to the field that where you expect it to be. Was
Okay.
all it was really doing. And so I'll try and see if I had any specific bits of code that did that. Otherwise, it'll be somewhere in the form fixer.
Which can you think of like which function it would have been? Or
Not off the top of my head.
okay.
It was kind of a mess.
Or like which task were you trying to use it for?
Field detection, the auto field detection stuff.
Okay. Okay. All right, I'll take a look at it and see if I can find it. It's not that long of a module either, and it would be in the PDF wrangling function.
Yes, definitely in PDF wrangling.
Okay. All right. So maybe I'll try to make a little progress on that this week.
Okay.
All right. See you in like 15 minutes.
Good.